here's a dome. Here's my reference shape of the dome, same size, right? Let's throw a couple things on here to give it some perspective. So first thing I wanted to compare it to is a person. Well, if you put a person on this scale, you actually can't even really see it. It's like a dot on the screen. So I didn't even bother with that. Next step up, let's maybe like a vehicle. So I went ahead and put my my Subaru WRX. Can you see it down there? Yep. There it is. That is to scale my blue Subi, about 4.5 feet tall. Can hardly see it. Trevor, though, drives a much larger vehicle. Trevor drives a mega dump truck at the gold mine that he works on. So a little bit of research, Trevor, you can correct me here if I got this wrong. Google tells me that your mining truck is about 30 feet tall. So there's that guy. There's Trevor's mining truck at 30 feet tall. He drives the truck that's as big as your house. It's huge.
The truck I drive is slightly larger than that, but you're within the ballpark. Mine's like 37 feet tall, but yes.
Okay. So imagine slightly bigger. Look at how this dome is dwarfing these kinds of things. We're talking about huge. Okay, so there's some Colorado objects, but as everyone knows, everything's bigger in Texas, right? So Paul's our resident Texan on the podcast. So I Googled, like what are some giant things in Texas? And I could not get away from this rather strange statue of a cowboy. Apparently there's a giant 55-foot tall statue of Big Tex.
Big Tex. Yeah. There we go.
Sir.
Okay, yeah, that does put into perspective for me, unironically. That may sound really funny, but no, he's pretty massive.
Welcome back to Following Noah on a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 238, and we are in chapters 34, 35, and 36 of Wind and Truth. Eliot, how are you?
I'm doing just fine. I'm super excited to talk about more Stormlight Archive, Roshar, what is going to happen with all these characters. I feel like we're in the slightly slow bit, waiting for something big to happen, but I think something big is going to happen, so there's still a lot to talk about.
A little bit of sitting and describing the scenery, which doesn't usually happen in Stormlight books, especially one with the time frame of 10 days.
Yeah.
Paul, how are you?
I'm doing great. I don't know what you're talking about with it being slow. We're getting Szeth chapters, so this is officially epic, full speed ahead for me. You're right. We are getting a little more picture of the scenery, and I'm having to love it. Well, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I happen to enjoy that. We're getting a little more scenery. I feel like Shinovar is awesome, and I've already loved the little bit of time that we've had in Shinovar.
Yeah, I agree. Paul, do we have a patron today? One singular patron today?
To answer your question you just asked me, no. We do not have one singular patron today. However, I wanted to do something a little bit different. And I will bring my cup out, and you will see a little page here, and you probably won't be able to read any of the names on here. But I wanted to give a brief shout out. We have a whole crew of spearmen, which we wanted to take a moment to shout out. I wanted to say thank you to all of our spearmen. This is past, present, all the spearmen ever. If you're still with us, thank you for your support. If you've been with us or supporting previously, thank you for your support. And I just wanted to try and rapid fire read all of our spearmen's names and usernames. So I'm going to see how well I can go down the list here, and bear with me on some of the pronunciations. So, all right, rapid fire. Thank you to Aglaia, Nate Bob Parr, Kobatus, Kaitaro, Bill, Ugly Barnacle, Andrea, Rulaine, Tyler, Rachel, Linda, Aiden, Grant, Delta, Aprons Only, Spencer, Alex, Shayla, Harry, Weirwood Watch, and Kevin. So, just a quick shout out to everyone there. Much appreciate the support, as always.
Thank you
you
very
all.
much. Appreciate all the spearmen over the last little under 4 years of having a Patreon.
Yeah.
All right. Paul, do you have 2 words to summarize these chapters for us?
I do. I'm really excited to talk about these words. My 2 words for this week are considerations and measures. If you've read these chapters, which you have if you're listening to this, if you have not, then we're having a different conversation. If you've listened to this, considerations and measures is what I would say a lot of what Szeth is wrestling with, particularly in his flashback chapter 36. He talks about measurements with the food he's helping, like with a cook, helping to cook, and he really likes that there's distinct measurements and that it's right. However, it's quickly made known to him that even if you do it, quote, by the book, it might not be up to someone else's standards. And so Szeth is really wrestling with a lot of these questions, or Szeth in the past is. So that's where I chose considerations and measurements. I think this also applies to Szeth current day, as he's beginning to think and consider things current day with Kaladin as well. But essentially, all about Szeth. Those are my 2 words.
Eliot, how about you?
My 2 words for these chapters go out to all the engineers out there, specifically all the mechanical and civil engineers that are out there, because they're going to know what I'm talking about here. My 2 words are stress and strain, which are going to be relevant in an engineering explanation I'd like to get into before we get too far. But I think it also can tie into what some of our characters are experiencing. I think we're really starting to uncover some of the strain on Szeth. We're starting to dig into why is he struggling with the stuff that he struggles with, and Kaladin and Syl and like random references to Spren seem to be indicating that the world is under some stress that maybe it shouldn't be. Hints, ominous hints everywhere.
Sounds good. Quick summary of 34, 35, 36, and then we're going to jump straight into an Eliot engineering corner.
Yeah, let me hit the highlights here pretty fast. Chapter 34, Adolin is walking down the Aizish defenses, getting ready for the invasion that they know is coming any second now, any minute, any hour. He spars a little bit with the Aizish general, and when I say spar, I mean like verbally spars. They're not quite seeing it eye to eye. 35 covers a lot. I imagine we're going to talk about 35 for a little while. Kaladin and Szeth are chatting, talking a little more about therapy, talking with their Spren. Szeth talks with his Spren. They're asking tough questions. What's, good and evil, all these kinds of things. And then Nightblood starts to weigh in with a nice little Warbreaker refresher. If you haven't read Warbreaker in a while, Nightblood will sum it up for you all in the middle of chapter 35. And then 6 is a flashback Szeth chapter where Szeth is trying to make soup and talks with the cook and the farmer. And that's it.
Sounds good. All right, so before we get to chapter 34, the page just to the left of chapter 34, it is 326 in my book. It says, a study of the Oathgate Dome of Azimir. And it has a bunch of cool little sketches. I don't know who's supposed to be sketching this. Maybe it says somewhere on here. But we have a pretty impressive looking dome, and Eliot has a presentation for us.
Ooh, I got super excited about this, and I instantly knew as soon as I read this chapter and saw this bit that this needed to be another engineering segment on the podcast, which if you're new with the podcast and you've only joined for Wind and Truth, I have done this in the past. There's been some super fun stuff that's come up over the course of the books that we've read that I felt like deserved a little bit of a science deep dive. Some of the Mistborn era too, we got into some fun stuff. And then Sunlit Man. Sunlit Man has some good engineering stuff in it. So I had to milk that a little bit. But yes, I wanted to dive in and talk about the dome, simply the structure that the Aizish have built over their oath gate. Because at first pass, it's like, oh, okay, cool, that's a dome. But then as soon as you like actually look at the dimensions of what they're talking about, it kind of gets a little crazy. So I wanted to give you guys some perspective on that. I'm going to show you some sketch things I've done here in some PowerPoint slides. But if you want some way better sketches, go check out the drawing that Trevor was talking about. I think it's on page, you just said it, Trevor, didn't you? 326. And there's an even better version of this. But I wanted to give you some perspective. So I don't know if Trevor, if you can pull up my presentation here, if this will show on the screen. I'm going to figure out a way to post this in our Discord for those that are just listening to us and not watching our video on YouTube. But might be worth hopping over on YouTube and watching this. It's actually got a few different slides here. I'm going to step through it. Okay. Just to kind of orient to what we're talking about here. Here is my little graphic of the dome. It's got these stone walls on the sides. It's got the bronze, we're told it's bronze dome that goes over the top. There, Adelin notices the Oathgate control building in the center. There's these little archer platforms on the walls on the sides. There's a little pop-up here blocking my thing. That's okay. We're told in the book.
Hide button, I think.
Can I hide that? Yeah,
there's a little hide button to the right. Sorry.
No, good spot. Thank you very much. So we're told in the book that this entire dome is, I think this is Adolin observing, well over 200 yards in diameter. So that's pretty massive. I went with 220 yards because I felt like if it was closer to like 250, he would have said like 250. So it might even be bigger than what I'm about to show you, which is going to be even crazier. We're told that the stone walls on the side have archer platforms 30 feet up, and that's halfway up the wall. So my gray stone walls on the right here and left are 60 feet tall. I just kind of extrapolated and guessed at the total height of the dome just based on kind of some shapes I was going off of in this art piece in the book. I think we're talking about somewhere in the ballpark of about 220 feet tall. So everything I'm about to show you is all to scale based on those numbers. So I'm going to compare this size of this thing to some things we all might be familiar with, just to give you a sense of how enormous this thing is.
I'm quite excited for this.
Me too. This is way more in depth than I was expecting. I'm really excited.
220 yards is 660 feet, or if you're a metric person, about roughly 201 meters. Now, 220 yards is like what, 2 football fields, right? In my first gut check on that, I was like, okay, that's big, but it's not like ridiculously huge. Guys, this thing is ridiculously huge, and I'm going to prove it to you. Okay, let's go. Here's the dome. Here's my reference shape of the dome, same size, right? Let's throw a couple things on here to give it some perspective. So first thing I wanted to compare it to is a person. Well, if you put a person on this scale, you actually can't even really see it. It's like a dot on the screen. So I didn't even bother with that. Next step up, let's maybe like a vehicle. So I went ahead and put my my Subaru WRX. Can you see it down there? Yep. There it is. That is to scale my blue Subi.
Look at that.
About 4.5 feet tall. Can hardly see it. Trevor, though, drives a much larger vehicle. Trevor drives a mega dump truck at the gold mine that he works on. So a little bit of research, Trevor, you can correct me here if I got this wrong. Google tells me that your mining truck is about 30 feet tall. So there's that guy. There's Trevor's mining truck at 30 feet tall. He drives the truck that's as big as your house. It's huge.
The truck I drive is slightly larger than that, but you're within the ballpark. Mine's like 37 feet tall, but yes.
Okay. So imagine slightly bigger. Look at how this dome is dwarfing these kinds of things. We're talking about huge. Okay, so there's some Colorado objects, but as everyone knows, everything's bigger in Texas, right? So Paul's our resident Texan on the podcast. So I Googled, like what are some giant things in Texas? And I could not get away from this rather strange statue of a cowboy. Apparently there's a giant 55-foot tall statue of Big Tex.
Big Tex. Yeah. There we go.
Sir.
Okay, yeah, that does put into perspective for me, unironically. That may sound really funny, but he's pretty massive.
Big text is apparently 55 feet tall, and yeah, you can hardly even still make him out on the screen here. So okay, so we got to get something bigger, right? So what else is in Texas? Apparently, there's a big giant Ferris wheel that, like, at one point was one of the biggest in the world, and apparently it's not anymore. But giant big Ferris wheel, 212-foot tall. I think it's called the Texas Star, somewhere around Dallas, Texas. That is how big you have to go to fill up, kind of roughly about the same size as this dome. Starting to sink in the size of this thing. Let's go further.
So you've got the whole Texas State Fair, which is a big deal. Texas State Fair and the Azimir Dome. That's pretty cool.
And before the Aizish realize it's an oath gate, it's supposed to be like their central market, right? So like the Texas State Fair, I feel like is a pretty comparable comparison here. That the Aizish like center of their market is in this dome before the oath gates.
Yep.
You think they're selling fair food also? Can I go get some deep fried cheesecake here?
Go get your ice cream.
Funnel cakes or something.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're fitting just about your entire state fair in here. Okay, so now I wanted to think about, like, is a dome of this size even physically possible? Which I don't necessarily want to get into that because I'm not a civil engineer. I try to do a little bit of research on this and do some calculations on, like, stress and strain, and could a bronze dome of this size even hold its own weight? I'm going to show you some stuff here in a second, which in my mind, the answer to that is very likely no. But we're also in a fictional world where any number of magic or soul casting crazy shapes could happen that's not really possible in our world. So I'm not really going to get into the can a bronze dome of this size hold its own weight, although I would love it if a civil engineer out there did that. I'd be all over that. Someone go calculate that up and put it on Reddit. Okay, so let's compare to a couple of other buildings that exist. So everything you're going to see here is to scale as best as I can make it. So here is this Azimir Dome compared to the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. So for over 1,000 years in history on Earth, this was the largest freestanding dome structure. And when they say largest freestanding dome structure, they're really just talking about this dome that's in the middle of this building. So the largest dome on Earth from like 500 AD to 1920. I just made that up off the top of my head. Is 20th century somewhere, I think. This was the largest dome structure on Earth, absolutely dwarfed by this bronze dome on Roshar. Going up a little bit bigger, the Taj Mahal, I think, is a really famous structure that a lot of people would recognize. It's a little bit bigger than the Hagia Sophia and fills up and starts to get a little bit bigger than our Azimir Dome. Next, I've got the Eiffel Tower. So the Eiffel Tower is crazy tall, right? So it would dwarf this in height, but here's just the base of the Eiffel Tower. It's about 410 feet wide, which still fits fairly comfortably within this Azimir Dome. Just to give you another piece of comparison, one of my favorite architectural buildings in the entire world is the Sydney Opera House. I still remember going there as a kid when I was like 8 years old, and I was like 10 or 11, but very cemented in my mind.
I was going to say, I was 8. You were like 12.
Yeah, probably. The Sydney Opera House actually fits in here pretty well. I feel like the Sydney Opera House kind of does justice to this, but the entirety of the Sydney Opera House would fit inside of this dome that we're talking about. Okay, so how does this dome compare to like the largest dome ever built? So if you Google largest dome ever built, what you will find is, at least according to Google, it is the Singapore National Stadium. Here is the Singapore National Stadium. It is the largest man-made freestanding dome structure ever built at 1,000 feet wide, which is quite a bit bigger than our dome, but only 260 feet tall. This dome that we're talking about, this bronze dome, is very close to the largest dome ever built by humans on Earth in our time. And we have all the fancy steel and concrete structures and truss diagonal arches and things like this. As far as we know, this bronze structure is just a bronze dome with stone supports on the side. So this thing is ridiculously huge. Ridiculously. Think of the largest building you've ever seen in your life, and this one is far bigger. unless you've been to the Singapore National Stadium.
So yeah, we're defending the Singapore National Stadium.
Yes,
Wonderful.
from the outside in. So
That was awesome.
that's what I got.
Yeah, I'm pretty baffled.
Okay, question. How did you get like grayscale image like pieces of each of these buildings?
I was wondering the
A
exact same thing when I saw the Sydney Opera House. I was like, these are also uniform.
Right.
way too much time Google searching,
There we
Fair
go.
enough.
There you have it.
and a minor amount of image editing.
Fair enough.
So there you go.
That was
Big dome.
That was very nice, Eliot. Nice job. Each time you come out with these presentations, you surprise me. You
You're welcome.
outdo yourself.
Yeah, that one was a big step. I was not expecting that.
Yeah, there's a lot of images there, so I'm not sure how I'm posting that on our Discord, but I'll figure it out.
I'll just, so instead of a normal thumbnail for this episode, I'll just put a picture of big Tex with like 50 feet tall and then the dome with like 200 feet tall.
Yeah, there
There
we
you
go.
go.
Okay. Chapter 34. Adelin is showing up in Azimir and he does a tour of said big dome that we just talked about. He shows up and walks around the dome and talks to like 3 different people. What did you guys get out of this chapter?
I feel like Adolin right now is our world building perspective in
A
this
good
book.
Shalon chapter.
Yeah. I guess he's now that they're together, I guess he's taking on that role from Shalon. Shalon has had a lot of action scenes so far. And the way this is going, I imagine we will certainly get Adolin action scenes as they are preparing for war. But this chapter felt kind of like a world building chapter where we get to see some of Azimir, see this big dome that Eliot just clarified to us the height and breadth of it. I did not pick up on the size of it. I was just thinking, your average structure, maybe not average, but you know what I mean. But yeah, we get that. Yeah, we get a lot from Maya as well, which we can talk more about the scene first if we don't want to talk about Maya yet, but that seemed to be like a really big deal. Seems to be very fluent now.
Yes, quite conversational. I agree. What struck me most about this chapter is how much time we're spending just walking around a building. I couldn't tell you the last time in a Sanderson book we really did that. So maybe it's like with your Theru at the beginning of Oathbringer, maybe when you are first trying to really grasp the visuals of your Theru, they spend some time walking through the forum, and then up to the top of the tower. You get like the top couple rooms there in good description. But I think that was the last time we really talked about big, vast scenery like this. And Adelin spends half the chapter describing the dome and the Aesir politics and how that has to do with the defense of this dome to the reader, which I actually quite enjoyed.
I really feel like we're dragging out the intro to this battle quite a bit, and maybe not in a negative sense. It just I was kind of guessing that these battles that we're about to see might be the early Sanderlanche in this book, and we're gonna have a bunch of battles in day 3, day 4, and then resolve them, move on to other things in 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9 and 10 are going to be the big climax at the end with the conflict and whatnot. But I'm almost wondering now if, because we spent so much time setting up this battle with Adolin, if we're actually going to spend a fair amount of time on this, or is it going to be we spend all of we're in day 3, right? All of day 3 on this battle, maybe all of day 4 as well.
Yeah, maybe. I'm really curious to see our POVs for day 4, because day 3 we get Kaladin, Szeth, Adolin, and this is the start of day 3. We compare that to day 2, where we went through each of those names, and I think it was the longest list of POV names we'd ever had for day 2. And now in day 3, we are seemingly completely forgetting about our spiritual realm
Which
staff.
is a good question. Like everybody else is in the spiritual realm, pretty much, right?
Pretty much.
From our big
Besides,
characters,
yeah, besides, our C tier Lopin and stuff like that
Sigzil, yeah.
in Urithiru, stuff like that.
So, like, yeah, are we gonna completely miss day 3 with all those characters? Are we gonna pick up in day 4 and have to like catch up on what's happened in the next day? I didn't even think about that.
I mean, I'm not worried about day 4 now. I'm worried that it's gonna be day 8 and we haven't heard from them a peep. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so Maya and Adelin have a chat. Is this our first like full Maya Adelin dialogue that we've ever had? Like she's chimed in a little bit before this, but is this our first full conversation?
This is by far the most we've heard in a succinct time. Doesn't she say like thinking about strategies and like warfare tactics, like tactics and strategy really makes it easy for her to, I guess, be energized and communicate.
It had me. I actually struggled a little bit with this because they described Maya as a soldier. If Pattern and Syl are your, happy-go-lucky scholar type spren, then Maya is a soldier. And I was thinking to myself, okay, well, I get it, but she's a cultivation spren. She's an edge dancer, right? So I was hung up a little bit on that of if she was really like a soldier for a spren, shouldn't she be like a stone ward spren, in my opinion? But the I was a little bit miffed by that, but I didn't think too much on it.
I do agree with you, Trevor. It felt I questioned. I did stop and think for a little while. It did not occur to me the size of the dome, so I did not stop and think there at the moment. But I did stop and think with this for a little bit. Why? Where I kind of rested my hat was Maya likely in the past would Maya have been bonded to another Radiant, right? And then became a Deadeye, way back in the past. We see visions of the day where they all break their bond or whatever, right? I'm wondering if whoever she was bonded to was like a tactician, war person. That's my guess. I don't know if that would really be instilled in Maya, but we have talked in the past about our spren kind of being designated for a person. It is fully not confirmed or true. Like, I can't say that's true, but we've talked about how, Syl kind of balances Kaladin out. She's very um, more lighthearted, aloof, and fun, where Kaladin is very, serious, right? Serious and sometimes sad. You know what I mean? And we it spread the conversation in the past of is there something with the bonds that Spren have to their Radiant that are like designed for them, if that makes sense, to like balance or enhance or something like that. I don't have any proof, but that's my thought, is maybe Maya's past is in that because she has an affinity towards it, but they could be the same way that like pattern has an affinity towards like numbers and patterns and things like that, right? And if that's the case, then yeah, it feels weird that she's in a cultivation spren talking about like the warrior's life. I guess I would agree that it would seem to be like a stoneward spren, which really little side note that we don't need to go into. I had a prediction a long time ago that Adolin was going to be a stone ward, so that's not going to happen. But if that lined up somehow, that'd be cool. Anyways,
I was noticing the fact that this spren human interaction we've got feels so different because a lot of the other examples that we have were spren progressing from like childlike naivete into maturity, like still in the pattern, and pattern are the biggest examples of this. But even like Wendell with Lift a bit, he's kind of goofy a bit. And Maya seems like a fully mature version of Sprint. She doesn't have to go on that journey. She's more just awakened, and she's awakened into a level of knowledge and understanding of the world that I feel like a lot of our other Spren had to gain over like multiple books.
Yeah, I also noticed that. This is Maya is picking up right where she left off, back in the Recreants of
Right.
her making the sacrifice decision. She was fully aware of what she was doing, a fully capable Spren, if you will. And she's picking up right there, which is actually kind of cool. Adolin is having to do a little bit more diplomacy than he signed up for at the beginning of his leave me alone in my dueling ring life. He's having to do some tact with the commander of the Aizish with Yonagon. I don't know if you guys really keyed into that part of the scene, but Yonagon shows up, and for the Aizish, Yonagon is more deific than he is a monarch. He's more of a religious figure. So Adolin shows up and starts contradicting the commander in front of Yonagon. And that really flares up the commander. And Adolin's like, well, why are you so offended by this? We're just talking strategy. We're just having a general talk as you would before a battle. And then it dawns on Adolin of, oh, I just embarrassed this guy in front of his god, is how this guy sees it. I should have I should have deferred to him instead of contradicting him in front of Yonagon. Did you guys key into that like cultural aspect of this chapter? I actually really enjoyed that layer to this conversation.
oh,
And I think to Adolin's credit too, he modifies his approach a little bit as it's going. I think he initially throws the guy under the bus a little bit, but then realizes, like, kind of partway through this, oh, maybe I should actually defer to him and make sure that I retain his level of authority that he has with his people. And he actually backs off on a few things that he would have rather done, which I think is to Adolin's credit.
yeah, that's what I was gonna. I was gonna say something similarly, Elliot. What stood out to me was him backing down. It's an interesting dynamic because we, the reader, feel like we would trust Adolin more. Um, Especially because he seems to have a better understanding of what they might be facing. But he chooses to step down at this time, and it kind of made me think for a while. It's a rabbit trail we don't need to go down, but like, what is the right thing to do? You're right. It's definitely not to try and upset the guy, Um, but being prepared is also really important when you're looking at war. So, yeah, I feel like it was interesting.
What about Kolot? Have you guys noticed Kolot? He's showed up like 6 or 7 scenes in this book, and so he's like doubled the amount of scenes he's been in the entire series. And he is, I think, a previous like captain of the guard for Dalinar. He's a light-eyed guy, and then back in Rhythm of War or maybe Oathbringer, I think he's one of the Windrunner squires, and then drops out. And then I don't know, like he keeps popping up in these Adelin scenes. He was with Adelin in the tower on the day before, in the Adelin Yonaghan scene. Where do you think Kolot is going? I could not even told you one thing about this guy before this book, and he's just keeps showing up.
Isn't the whole thing with him like he did not get bonded to a Spren? Like a Spren did not bond with him.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad. It kind of felt like I don't know. He got rejected. He got kicked out of Sky High. Kind of sad for Kolot. But
What a reference.
yeah, there we go.
That was a throwback.
Yeah, that is. Man, I haven't seen that in a long time, but yeah. I also feel like that's a really good reference. Kick out Sky High because he didn't make it into the the Windrunners. Yeah. Anyways, yes, Kolot. I could not tell you why he keeps being mentioned. There's obviously going to be plenty of opportunities in this book for characters to step up and make a name for themselves for good or for bad. He could have a bitter side. It could be something bad. Could also be a time for some heroism. Like that. There's a lot of great opportunities. What I more so am afraid of with a lot of these characters is that they're being set up and mentioned potentially to have a more impactful death.
Yeah,
Is
is
my
this guy
fear.
gonna die in 2 episodes?
Yeah, I feel like within the war, he might just he might get axed, and then if we didn't have these moments, then we wouldn't think twice about it. I'm sure. So I'm afraid that's my primary guess for the guy.
I wonder if we'll have a scene between them where they kind of relate to each other of feeling left behind by the Radiance. Because I mean, but back in the Way of Kings, these guys were, some of the best strategic tools on Roshar, between like a commander and Adolin, and now they feel a little bit irrelevant. And Adolin kind of has that thought. He's had that thought several times, but Adolin's been doing his best to handle that. So I wonder if he could relate to Kolot, and we'll get that scene.
Another tie-in potentially with Kolot and the other Alethi soldiers that are there. Adolin actually has a moment early on in this chapter where he's battling with the error that he made in Kholinar. At least that's how he's recalling it, where he's remembering that big scene in Oathbringer, right? Where they go through, Oathbringer Part 3, the epic Elokar scenes, and then they flee through the Oath Gate. But Adolin is remembering it as he left all those soldiers there, and only he and the heroes went through the Oath Gate, and everyone else was left to die. And he's fighting this like survivor's guilt kind of thing, where he's wrestling with, oh my gosh, I abandoned those soldiers in Kholinar, which I didn't remember this ever being a thing for him before, but it totally makes sense that would be something weighing heavily on his mind. I wonder if we're going to see some sort of parallel to that have to resurface.
Oh, like evacuate the city through the Oath Gate?
Or, yeah, any version of, do you go down with your troops or do you flee because you know it's hopeless kind of thing.
Anything else on Adelin before we talk about Szeth for the rest of the episode?
Just real briefly, you had a note on it too, but I actually tied in a slightly separate part of it. When Adolin and the Aizish general are kind of going at it, he says, like, what are you here to fight for, Alethi, other than you're just here to take our lands? And Adolin responds with, I'm fighting for the good of all Roshar. And then at the very end of the chapter, Adolin is remembering something that his mother told him. And she says, care, fight for something, not simply because you're pointed that way by a monarch, no matter how beloved. And I thought that was kind of interesting. What's the dilemma that's going to come up where Adolin has to focus in on why he's fighting?
The title of the chapter is For the Good of All Roshar, which is the reason Adolin comes up with to the Aizish commander. But I bet you're onto something. I bet he's going to have to make a tough decision and then really ask himself why he's there. All right, Paul. Not only do we get a modern day Szeth chapter, we get a flashback Szeth chapter in the same episode. Where are we starting?
I was gonna say this is a pretty loaded. My favorite, as of the end of Rhythm of War. I remember at that time I said Adelin had actually surpassed Szeth as my favorite. So it was like Adelin, Szeth. There's a lot in contention for favorites after that, right? But the 3 chapters having an Adelin POV and then 2 Szeth POVs, this is like Christmas morning. This has been awesome. So I hope this keeps rolling. But yes, we get flashback and current day Szeth. Is there? Do we want to start current day or flashback?
Yeah, let's do current day because it's before the flashback chapter.
Okay, so chapter 35, we get some good old more Kaladin and Szeth conversations. This time, it's a little bit. It's different. It's a little bit different than the last time that we had this. Before, it was kind of like a, I'm not going to talk about this. This is pointless to talk about this from Szeth. That was his attitude. And here I feel like we get a little more. You might not say it's better, but I would argue it's better. Where Szeth is really pushing back, like actively like making claims and pushing back against Kaladin. I think this is a positive result, and I think most people would agree with that because he is engaging in dialogue and thinking more instead of avoiding. I think we're making steps in the right direction. Whether that's right or if that's just me coping and wanting Szeth to make a great character arc this book, we definitely see some development here. We also get some quite entertaining dialogue from Nightblood about Warbreaker's history. Some interesting things also to point out. Szeth and Nightblood think Taravangian is dead. The Taravangian Nightblood has consumed Taravangian.
Yep.
That's a random side note. But as far as let's start with the Kaladin Szeth therapy. Do y'all have any things to say about those scenes or the dialogue that happens there? Because there's a lot of other fun little things in this chapter, but that's the most important aspect.
Well, Kaladin's certainly trying, but Szeth is not like letting him have much headway. The dialogue that stuck out to me was Kaladin is pretty frustrated at this point and tells Szeth, "No, Szeth, you're a person. You can make choices. You have volition." And Szeth is adamant that things just happen to him, and I don't remember how they phrase it, but it's like the sands have swept him here, and he had no choice in it. He's just reacting to what's in front of him. And Kaladin's like banging his head against the wall with like, you could choose to be here or not, this is not being done to you. So there's not much progress there yet, except for like Nightblood chimes in and like freaks out about how he was created and has some questions for Kaladin.
I liked that exact thing you were just keying on there too, Trevor. Of I feel like a lot of Kaladin's attempts here to bring up these subjects have been a little cringy getting up to this point, but I feel like this was the moment where he really started to kind of key into some of the big things. I think we talked before about we wanted to see, or at least I wanted to see Szeth take more intentional action, make choices, don't just obey for the sake of obeying. And that's what Kaladin is getting at. You know, the whole you said it, you're not a thing, you're a person. I was like, yes, that is absolutely the case there. And even the fact that he's baiting Szeth into having a conversation, I feel like is a step. So I think we'll hopefully see more of that. It's not just Szeth shrugging him off. But yes, the fact that the therapy starts to work on Nightblood and not Szeth, I thought was pretty hilarious.
I think it's funny. I feel like
before we get to Nightblood, I want to talk about Szeth real quick. Were you going to go for Nightblood, Paul?
I was just going to say that I think it's really funny that Nightblood is like, as far as the voices that Szeth listens to, it's like his best influence right now is Nightblood, which is very funny.
Real quick before we get to the Nightblood lore drop, which I had to check the cover to make sure I was still reading a Stormlight book because they just start talking about a bunch of Warbreaker terms. But Kaladin makes the claim, or Kaladin gives a hypothetical to Szeth of, so these people that sent you on this quest, they're to blame for all the killing, and what they did was unjust. And Szeth's like, yep, you got it. So that's why we're here to cleanse Shinovar. And then Kaladin says, okay, so what if they made a law that said they could legally do that and send you on a quest? And then Szeth says, huh, well, I guess they'd be fine. Or I guess that'd be fine and we'd be all good here because they'd then be following the law. And Kaladin gives him the, what the heck are you talking about, face? What does that not ring any bells for you that would be obviously immoral to then bet, like, you're just worried about what's in the law, and if they create a law to retroactively cover themselves, that's fine with you. And Szeth's Spren chimes in and says, yes, that's it. Human beings are like super unreliable. You just need to follow the law. What's going on with Skybreaker Spren? Is this an actual Skybreaker thing, or is this some like corrupted, twisted Skybreaker Spren stuff going on?
This has been my number one question. Because I mean, we don't have any indication that this Spren is corrupted other than our intuition, right? It's possible that this is the way that Skybreaker Spren could be, and they fully are like, you follow the law and that is it. But we know that there's a lot of ways that Spren can be affected by perception, by a host of things. And I could fully understand if, like, we talked about the way that the Spren talks to Szeth. And is that because that's how the Spren talks, or is that because that's how Szeth feels he should be talked to? It's not very clear to me what the right answer is. But we do know that if Szeth is to improve or heal or go on this positive character arc, something is going to have to change. I don't know if that is the Spren is bad and somehow he needs to no longer be a Skybreaker. I don't think that's going to be the case, but I could see it. And then on the flip side, will that improve or change as Szeth's frame of mind improves and changes? I'm really not certain. We still don't have a name for the Spren, at all. The things that I would say make me think there is a potential third option, that it is some kind of corruption or wrongful spren or something, is that we don't know the spren's name, and the spren's direction is still unclear, or at least to our eyes. You know how we were doubting the Stormfather before because he won't tell Dalinar what he needs to do or pushes back on things and kind of is all ambiguous. He's like, no, you can't do this. You know, you can't seek this. That makes you unworthy, type of thing. Could very easily be considered like gaslighting or manipulation, right? We don't really know for sure, but it could be. I think this is the same here. Whenever Szeth talks about his mission, he's on this mission to cleanse Shinovar, and he's like, "What does that mean?" And the spread is like, "You'll know it when you see it," which is, you get that answer in a lot of stories. You know, you'll know it when you find it, sort of sentiment. You know, but it still feels unclear. I'm remarkably unconvinced. So yeah, this our high spren here is really on my watch list.
Yeah, as someone who consistently tests as a skybreaker on the whole radiant order test thing, no matter how many times I retake that thing, it's always skybreaker. I feel like I'm way more invested than I should be in making sure we figure these kinds of questions out. Everyone else who's not skybreaker is probably just like, skybreakers, don't like them, moving on. And yeah, I'm with you, Trevor, asking some of those questions of, is this how the skybreakers are meant to be? Because there does seem like such a huge contradiction there. Even in the scene where the Spren chimes in and he's like, "Yeah, you're exactly right, Szeth. We can never rely on men. Men are incongruent, walking contradictions. To rely on human choices, to rely upon chaos itself." It's like, yes, but then you're going to turn around and say the law that's written by men is the higher truth, because that doesn't make any sense.
And and Szeth has that inner dialogue in the chapter of like, well, okay, if you take what I just claimed to its logical conclusion, then you can write anything down and you just get anarchy. Like one thing leads to another, and you just start fighting. And I did not have the redemption of the Skybreakers high on my bingo board for this book because I had such high assumptions that that was going to happen. I wasn't wondering if that would happen. It was more of a when for me. If this would happen in this book, I just assumed it would. So now I'm a little concerned that this is what this high spread is up to is nailed directly manipulating Szeth. I mean, obviously he is, but to what extent with this spren is the spren involved? How much of the high spren are involved? Do we need to go help our high spren in the spiritual realm somehow? I don't know. Well, whatever. Well, I'm concerned for our Skybreaker order. I'll just say that. Okay, Nightblood. Nightblood goes on this little rant about how he was created by Vasher with Shashara, I think is her name. And yeah, what did you guys get out of our Warbreaker lore?
Yeah. Nightblood manages to drop basically every name from Warbreaker.
Yes.
And not every single one, but a whole bunch of them. Obviously, just straight up referring to Zyle as Vasher here. It says Vasher created me with Shashara, and I can't even name all the names that he names, but says that, talks about Vivenna, talks about how much Kaladin would get along with Vivenna because they're
Oh,
both
yeah.
me.
I
You
forgot about
know,
that.
it was quite ridiculous. And what really stuck out to me, which maybe this was something I was supposed to know of anyways, but I just thought it was cool, is that they were talking about names at some point, and he's like, "Yeah, Vasher has gone by several names, right? Um, Notably Warbreaker, but he doesn't like being called Warbreaker. He doesn't like that name." And I'm like, "That's so cool. I didn't know he was called Warbreaker. I don't know if that's something. It's been a long time since I read the book, so I don't know
If
if that's in there or if that was a drop here."
Yeah, it's the drop in the end of Warbreaker. It's fuzzy for me as well, but that's one of his names, and that's like the big name drop at the end of the book is Vasher's the guy, and whatever.
Gotcha. The guy. Yeah. Okay. But yeah, we finally know a bit of the origins of Nightblood, which was crazy to me and not something that was on my bingo board at all. Especially in a yeah, it was not on my bingo board in the slightest.
I was full on fascinated by the whole identity crisis that Nightblood starts to spiral into because every time we've seen Nightblood up until this time, he's so bloodthirsty and wants to kill anything and everything. Evil, kill evil, destroy evil, I guess is the tagline, right? And we've talked before, and the many times we've seen him that Nightblood is a huge problem because every single living being around him just gets categorized into evil. And then all of a sudden in this chapter, I'll be honest, I completely forgot Nightblood was even there. It was just Szeth and Kaladin. They're chatting. Syl pops in every once in a while. Kaladin and Szeth kind of drop these lines, and then all of a sudden it's like, and then Nightblood chimed in and it's like, oh yeah, that's right, Nightblood is here. But he starts responding to kind of Kaladin's questions, and Nightblood is asking things like, well, if humans aren't a good judge of right and wrong, then is a sword any better? And Kaladin's like, oh yeah, good question. It's like, yeah, these are the big questions. And to have Nightblood asking them is a huge shift in Nightblood's perspective, I feel like.
He
I
he
Go ahead, Paul.
sorry. I've managed to uh, come at the same time as you multiple times this episode. Whoops. He refers to Teravangian as whenever they say that Nightblood consumed Teravangian. Nightblood asks like, "Oh, well, that guy was nice, right? Like he wasn't evil. Like I wouldn't destroy evil, but I don't think he was evil, and I don't think you're evil, Szeth." And Szeth is like, "No, he was evil. He obviously has much cause to hate Teravangian, so he does view him as evil." But yeah, I thought that was interesting. Like what you were saying, Elliot. I feel like we're starting to see some change with Nightblood in a way I'm not certain of. And he didn't think, you know, Teravangian was bad. I don't know.
I I actually keyed into that of okay, the sword that has definitions of evil in his head, and that's all he has in his head, doesn't think Teravangian is evil. Uh, okay, are we gonna get to a scene where Nightblood like has some warped view of evil and refuses to kill something that we need him to kill?
Do you think it's because Teravangian technically, for a little bit, wielded Nightblood? Because Nightblood's never seemed to have a problem with whoever picks it up and uses it to destroy evil,
Uh-huh.
right?
The
I don't th-
it's weird though because that scene is kind of happens like in the spiritual realm. Teravangian's like already dead and then grabs Nightblood and stabs Rays. And so if Nightblood thinks that Rays wasn't evil and that's who he killed, and he's like, "Oh yeah, the guy I killed, he wasn't that bad." I've got some serious questions for our definitions here.
Yeah, what a turn that will be if in a key moment where the heroes are counting on Nightblood to kill the evil, and Nightblood goes, you know what, guys? Actually, this is probably not as evil as you thought it was. I'm gonna refuse to do this. What a turn that would be.
The insatiable sword doesn't want to eat
Right?
odium.
Nah, I'm good. I'll pass. I Before we move on to some of the other questions being raised in this chapter, I just wanted to say I love the fact that our characters are spending time wrestling with these concepts like what is the definition of good and evil, because it leaves you as a reader with a great question in your mind. If we accept kind of Kaladin's point of view of the fact that we need a third party standard for what good and evil is, and human written laws are not that, well, what is? What is the standard of good and evil? Is it something human created? Is it something else? These are really tough, like metaphysical questions that I really enjoy thinking and talking about, and it's our stories kind of taking us there, which I enjoy.
I also enjoy it. And with the concept of the Cosmere, it actually gets really weird because you have a lot of mortal beings that grabbed shards and then created people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have the concept of mortal beings creating other mortal beings, okay, then where does mortal, then where do your morals come from? If not from your flaw, if your creator is then flawed, how do you dial in your moral compass? Is, I guess, the question I'm trying to ask.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually a fascinating question. Anything else before we chat with the wind one more time before our Szeth flashback chapter? So they're still in Szeth's old house, I think, and the wind shows up and says some more existential crisis one-liners and then leaves. We are fearing for the end of all spren, is what the wind says. And the wind and Syl kind of have a conversation about the end of the world. What'd you guys get?
Syl is back to saying ominous, really weird, vague things. She's talking with Kaladin. I was going to try and find it for the context, but I don't remember exactly where this fits in. But she very clearly says at one point, the soul of the world is contorting. What does that mean? We're getting so many of these, like the world is ending kind of vibes coming from a lot of different directions, or maybe mainly from this whole the wind, capitalize the wind. But Syl is on this train of something big and crazy is happening.
We've talked about, is Roshar going to even exist after this book?
Yeah.
So I mean, if she thinks the soul of the world is changing, maybe it is. Maybe we are not going to see the same Roshar for the back half.
Maybe one of the last pages of the book has a new map of Roshar, and that's a huge spoiler or something. All right. Szeth has measuring cups, Paul. What did you think of Szeth and his measuring cups and how something so precise could still be wrong, according to the cook lady?
First of all, I loved this chapter and these like analogies used. I really love cooking. It's one of my favorite things to do. I really enjoy cooking. So this I feel like spoke to me a little bit. So and like I said, my words were considerations and measurements, and it was largely due to this chapter. So Szeth is helping the cook, and he really likes the system. This cook has designed a tool which holds all the measurements for a particular dish, right? And all you have to do is chop up your ingredients, put your ingredients in its designated slot. It's all measured out perfectly. The proportions, you have your like onions and whatnot, and garlic and pepper, etc. All your things, your oil. It actually sounded pretty, yummy. Like that's like onions, garlic,
Coriander.
yeah, coriander, oil, and pepper, salt and pepper. That's like the base to most good things in life, most good food. And um, I was feeling spoken to there. And Szeth is like, I love this because I always know it's gonna be right. You're gonna get the same result. You put in the same ingredients, you're gonna get the same results every time. Therefore, it is right and good, and this cook has really nailed the system. He's loving it. It's so built for Szeth. Then the cook comes by, tries a bite, and says, needs more pepper. It shatters child Szeth's
I
worldview. His world collapses. I'm
I
being a little
I loved
exaggerating,
that. He's
but
like, absolutely not. I followed the rule. I followed the recipe to the letter, and you cannot tell me this is wrong. You wrote the recipe.
see, really what Szeth needs to get into is baking. if you cook a bunch, cooking is kind of, you just throw whatever on there. If you have a little extra pepper, if you have a little less, whatever, it's gonna cook well. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be great. If you get into baking, though, it's way more important to have like precise measurements and things like that because whatever the science of it turns out differently. We need to get Szeth in a bakery. He'd excel best there. But okay, so Cook comes in, says needs more pepper, and that hurts Szeth's feelings. He arrives at the conclusion that he must have somehow done something wrong. He doesn't know. He's like, I know I put enough pepper in there, but somehow, some way, I must have looked over it and done it wrong. I must have
Yeah.
not put enough.
He comes to the conclusion that he is flawed. Like he's like, my tools are finite, therefore I am incorrect by applying the tools. And I was like, oh, poor buddy.
I know, poor guy, man. He's so off the mark. It's ridiculous. So then he talks to the farmer, which I really loved this conversation. First of all, I've liked the ways we've gotten to see a little more of the world um in Shinovar through these chapters. I was gonna say, first off, like the food sounds good. Like I'd absolutely eat the food, it sounds nice. S- Um Second off, he talks about this farmer who comes in and has dirt under his nails, is very colorful because of working with the earth, and just what he does as a farmer, right? Is color splashes, all the things. And he talks about how it's kingly to have dirt under your nails and this. And I just thought that was really fascinating and neat. A rabbit trail that we don't need to go down is, I think, gardening or farming is such an engaging and deep topic, like philosophically. There's so much to learn from gardening specifically. Go pull weeds and tell me you're not learning about the trials and the challenges of life and what it means to, work with your hands, I guess. I don't know. There's a lot I could go um with with that. But anyways, so he's like revering this farmer, right? And he asks him, how do you what does he say specifically? It's like, how do you make choices? How do you know what's right? He asks a question along those lines. I'm paraphrasing. And yeah, it was just a really great conversation. Um, I'm blanking a little bit on what the response was. I know that they talk a bit about animals. The farmer says animals don't make choices. Szeth begins to question and kind of say, I think they do. He thinks about Molly, his favorite sheep, um, and things. And I don't know if he ever leaves with a super exact like change of mind, but it definitely makes him think more.
It's an interesting answer that the farmer gives him, actually. And I was thinking about this a bit too, because the farmer gives him this big metaphor about the humans and the animals that you're getting into. But then ultimately his answer back to Szeth is, you ask how I know what to do, I don't. That is the simplest answer. I try, I see, I act. And that act is like tying into this whole, humans act thing that he's trying to explain. And he kind of goes on and rambles a little bit further, but he basically says he's referencing the spren as almost like the forces of nature. He's like, nature moves everything else. I just do what I can and I learn by trying, which I thought was like, okay, that's an answer, but you didn't really answer the question. That was kind of a dodge. The question was, how do you know what's right and wrong? And the answer coming back was just basically, I do and I adjust as I go. Okay. Okay. Fine.
I don't know if I have too much to add besides it's an extreme other side of the coin for modern day Szeth of there's the farmer's trying to just really push on this idea of acting based on what you see, and Szeth, modern day Szeth, does not want to act at all. He just reacts.
Right. It does seem like maybe we're headed towards this whole Szeth has grown up to this point and really strongly believes in the system. And when I say the system, I mean like the Shin culture and belief system. And he's just experiencing more and more. We're starting to see this of things that are chipping away at that. He's potentially headed for a lose all faith in the Shin way of life. He thought his parents were going to have the right answers. They didn't have the right answers when the rock showed up in the middle of the field. He's now talking to the farmer, which is basically like the ruler of their town. What are the answers? Just kind of figure it out as you go. And I wonder if this is just slowly going to erode Szeth's strong feelings of right and wrong. And then ultimately he's going to have a breaking point, which leads to where we're at with modern day Szeth, where he just goes, you know what? I've had it with this whole system. I'm just not going to make any decisions ever. I'm done. And that's where we get to with modern Szeth.
Yeah.
There are two other things I want to point out in this chapter. One is just a quick the farmer basically invites Szeth to come dance for their farming team, I guess. And I
Yes.
just thought that was fun. And they kind of pose the questions, of is that what they talk about it of adding or subtracting? Like, what does dancing add? Or what do things like music and such add? Like farming adds. But he isn't certain that dancing adds, right? And the farmer kind of gives him an answer. Yeah, if you bring joy to others and inspire others, like that is absolutely adding, which is a neat takeaway as well. The other thing, and I won't go too far down as well, but so when they talk about making choices, the farmer says, animals don't make choices. And Szeth is kind of like, I think they do make choices, but he wasn't really certain. Like I said, he thinks back to Molly and things. And I spent a lot of time thinking on this, and I should not have spent as much time as I have. But I thought about this. I was thinking, do animals make choices? Okay. So where I've landed, which could be wrong, whatever, maybe there's someone who's studied this who knows a lot more. My understanding is animals, have their nature, their God-given design and instincts, right? They're largely reactionary. Animals obviously don't rationalize like humans do, don't think, but they do react to things such as, fleeing from danger, eating and desiring food and things like that, right? But animals are a little more like at least some animals are a little more intelligent. The example I think I thought of most was dogs. There's lots of unique breeds of dogs. Alex and I own a border collie, who's a working dog, right? And border collies need to have like a job. Like our dog Rosie will not come back inside when she's outside unless she's done her job, which at our home is fetch. She like that is literally that is part of her wiring. She border collies are herding dogs. They used to herding sheep and they love it, right? Like they're just designed for that purpose, right? Um, other dogs have that too, but I all this to say, animals making choices, humans making choices. How does it differ? Where is it similar? Because I was also gonna say humans also have like a lot of natural tendencies or natures, but it's so largely based on socialization. So, anyway, I'm going on and on about this. Like I said, I spent too much time thinking on this. Eliot was making our diagram of the dome, and I was thinking about dog and human socializations and like how it affects how. Anyways, all that to say, it's very fascinating to me. I've been very engaged in I don't know, just the way that Szeth has been thinking, and all this stuff. So that's my there's my rant you did not ask for on.
I love it. I love these questions. I actually really enjoy that these conversations with Szeth in flashback and Szeth in modern day with Kaladin are throwing out these sometimes like unanswerable things. What is right and wrong? Do I make choices? Do animals make choices? What's the difference between me and the animal? I actually really love this. These are the kinds of things that I like to point to when I say this is a book that made me learn something about myself when I have to wrestle with questions of this magnitude. So I like that these are buried in these chapters a lot.
No, the animals don't make choices. Next question.
I agree. I agree
Done.
with you.
Solved.
Anything else for these chapters?
That's everything I got.
Likewise.
All right. Let's reconvene next week. We have 37, 38, and 39 for next week. Thanks for joining me, Paul and Eliot. We will reconvene next week.
Onward.
Toodles.